The 42nd floor was dark, except for one light, a single lamp, a chessboard beneath it, and a woman who ran a company worth $800 million sitting alone at 9 p.m., staring at a position she couldn't solve. Then the sound of wheels on marble, slow, steady, getting closer. A man in coveralls stopped in the doorway. He looked at the board, and in the space of 3 seconds, without introduction, without permission, without hesitation, he told her exactly what was wrong. She didn't ask how he knew. She said, "Beat me, and I'll marry you." He didn't laugh. He sat down. 21 moves later, the Ivory King was on its side, and the man who was supposed to be invisible, the man no one in that building had ever looked at, twice stood up, said good night, and walked away like he hadn't just changed everything. Nobody knew his name. They were about to. The building had 42 floors. Darnell Cooper had cleaned all of them. He knew which hallways echoed at midnight, which conference rooms still smelled like cold coffee at 9 p.m., which executives left their doors open when they worked late, not because they wanted company, but because silence made them nervous. He knew all of it, and none of them knew his name. That was fine. That was the arrangement. You show up. You do the work. You go home to the one person in the world who actually needed you to come back. 7 years of this. 7 years of being the man nobody saw. And somewhere along the way, unseen had started to feel like safe. He pushed his cart down the 42nd floor corridor at 8:53 on a Tuesday in October. The wheels made a soft rhythm on the marble, the kind of sound that disappears into the background of a busy building, which was exactly what he wanted. The corridor turned left. He turned with it. The executive conference suite was ahead, glass walls on 3 sides, a long mahogany table that probably cost more than his car, usually empty by 8, usually dark. Tonight there was a light on. He slowed without thinking about it, not because of caution, because of the board. He could see it from the doorway. A chess set sitting in the middle of the long table like it had always belonged there. Dark wood, light wood, pieces carved with the kind of care that took time. Not a display set, not decoration. Someone had been playing on that board. Someone had been playing seriously. Darnell stood in the doorway and looked at the position, Queen's Gambit, classical variation. Black had just played knight to f6, which was the right move. But the bishop on c8 was blocked. Whoever was playing black had a problem they hadn't solved yet. Probably didn't know they hadn't solved it. He stood there longer than he should have. "You can come in." He looked up. She was sitting at the far end of the table. He hadn't seen her in the shadows past the lamp. She was maybe late 30s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that came from spending years in rooms where people watched you for weakness. Still in her work clothes, a charcoal blazer, a silk blouse the color of deep water. A glass of water sat beside her, untouched. She was watching him look at the board. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll come back." "You were analyzing the position, not a question. A statement. Accurate. I didn't mean to stare, but you were." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you see?" He should have said nothing. He should have nodded politely and backed the cart out and come back in 40 minutes when she was gone. That was the arrangement. That was how this worked. Instead, he heard himself say, "Bishop on c8 is buried. You've got 4 pieces developed, but one of them can't move without losing tempo. Whoever's playing black has a structural problem they won't feel until around move 14. Silence. She looked at the board, then back at him. "I'm playing black," she said. Of course she was. "Then you have until move 14 to fix the bishop." Another silence. He waited for the dismissal, the polite version or the sharp version. He'd received both in this building and could tell which was coming from the first syllable. What came instead was something else entirely. "Sit down," he blinked. "Ma'am, sit." She gestured at the chair across from her. "Play me." He looked at the chair, looked at his cart, looked back at her. She was serious, completely serious. The expression on her face was the expression of a woman who did not make offers she didn't mean. "I have a floor to clean," he said. "The floor will still be dirty in an hour, true? Technically, I'm working and you're asking me to stop." She leaned back in her chair. Not quite amusement, not quite arrogance. The ease of someone who was rarely told no. "Unless you're afraid to play." There it was. He'd heard that tone before, on tournament floors, in high school gymnasiums that smelled like chalk and nervous energy, in hotel conference rooms where the lighting was bad and the clocks counted down. That tone, that invitation dressed as a dare had walked him into 200 games across 15 years. He'd won most of them. One game, he said. One game, she agreed. He pulled the chair out and sat down. She straightened the board between them. Confident hands. Quick. She'd done this 1,000 times. He noticed she reset black's position without looking at the pieces. Muscle memory. The kind that only came from years. I'll play white, she said. He nodded. She extended her hand across the table. Lorraine Mitchell. He shook it. Darnell. She waited. Just Darnell, he said. She held his gaze for one beat longer than necessary. Then she reached forward and moved her queen's pawn. The first 5 moves were formalities. Both of them knew it. You feel it in the opening when someone is testing. Probing. Figuring out what they're dealing with. Lorraine played with the controlled efficiency of someone who had studied openings, who understood structure. She was good. She was genuinely good. She was also about to find out what that word meant in context. By move 8, Darnell was settling into the game the way you settle into a language you haven't spoken in years. The words come back. The rhythm comes back. The part of your brain that went quiet starts to wake up. He hadn't let himself feel this in a long time. He wasn't going to think about that right now. Move 9. Move 10. He started building the pattern. Nothing she could see yet. Nothing that would announce itself. Just small decisions. Small advantages compounding the way interest compounds. The bishop problem he'd spotted from the doorway became relevant exactly when he'd predicted. At move 12, he could feel her starting to sense something was wrong. At move 14, he watched her pause. Her finger rested on her knight. She looked at the board the way people look at a map when they realize they've been reading it upside down. Processing, recalculating, looking for the moment it went wrong. He knew that moment. Move 7. She couldn't find it from here. She moved the knight. Wrong square. Not badly wrong, she was still fighting, but wrong enough. He answered immediately. She sat back, just slightly. Just enough. At move 18 she was in survival mode. Playing the way intelligent people play when they're losing brilliantly, stubbornly, extracting every half point from every position. He respected that, genuinely. But it wasn't enough. Move 21. He placed his rook quietly. Without announcement, she stared at the board for a long moment. Her king was in a box she couldn't unlock. 3 pieces covering every exit. The pattern he'd built from move 4 had arrived exactly where he'd aimed it. She reached out and tipped her king over. The ivory piece rested on its side on the mahogany table. Neither of them said anything. Then, "You hustled me." Her voice was controlled. "Almost. I didn't hustle you," he said. "You walked in here like you'd never seen a chessboard. I never said that. You didn't have to." Her eyes were sharper now. "You let me think. I let you think what you assumed." He started resetting the pieces, quietly, one by one. "You looked at my cart and decided what I was. I didn't correct you. That's not the same." Silence. She was looking at him differently now, the same way she'd looked at the board after move 14. Like someone recalculating from a position she thought she understood. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "Here and there. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He finished resetting the board. Every piece back to its starting square. He pushed back from the table and stood. "Thank you for the game, Miss Mitchell." He was halfway to his cart when she said it. "Wait." He stopped. Didn't turn around. "If you'd won," she paused. He could hear her choosing words. "I told you I'd marry you before the game started." I said that, he remembered. He'd heard it as the kind of thing people say when they're confident. The verbal equivalent of a shrug. "I'll bet everything because I know I'm not going to lose." "You did say that," he said. "I meant it as a figure of speech. I know you did." He turned around then. She was still sitting at the table, her hand resting on the fallen king, watching him. "Good night, Miss Mitchell." He pushed his cart out into the corridor. The wheels made their soft sound on the marble. He turned the corner. And somewhere in the elevator on the way down to the parking structure, alone in the humming quiet of the descending car, Darnell Cooper smiled. A real one. The kind he hadn't worn in months. Not because of the game. He'd won hundreds of games that meant nothing anymore. Because of the look on her face after move 21. Because she'd been genuinely surprised. And it had been a very long time since anyone had looked at him and not known exactly what they were getting. He drove home through Atlanta at 10:15. The city was still going. It never really stopped. He drove the same route he always drove. Not the fastest route. The one that took him past Maya's elementary school. Habit. Something about seeing that building in the dark, knowing his daughter was safe inside their apartment 6 blocks past. It made the drive feel like an arrival. Not just a stop, the apartment was quiet when he came in. Maya was asleep, 8 years old. She slept like she was making a statement about it, completely committed, one arm thrown over her face. The small constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling fading toward morning. He stood in her doorway for a moment. She breathed fine tonight, even and slow. The wheeze that scared him was absent. He let out a breath he'd been holding since the parking lot. He went to the kitchen. Didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small one above the stove, the one that made everything look amber and close. He opened his laptop on the table next to the chess set. Denise's chess set, plain wooden pieces. 2 shades, no ornamentation. It had lived on this table for 7 years. The email from Dr. Sandra Anderson's office was still there, marked unread. Even though he'd read it 4 times already, new treatment protocol, promising results in recent trials, significantly reduced frequency of acute episodes, cost per year out of pocket after insurance, $9,600. He stared at that number for a while, then he closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen under the stove light and didn't let himself run the numbers past midnight. He'd spent years learning how to set certain things down at a specific hour. It was a discipline like any other. You practiced it, you got better at it. You never got perfect at it. He looked at the chess set. Denise had taught herself to play from a library book. The year before Maya was born, she'd never gotten good. She was the first to admit it, laughing at her own moves, shaking her head at positions she'd walked herself into. But she'd loved the set. The pieces were plain, undecorated. 2 shades of wood, she'd said she liked that. No fuss, just the game. He hadn't played on that set since she died. He reached out now and touched the night with one finger. The way you'd touch something that belongs to a time you can't return to. Careful. Brief. There was one other thing about Maya and chess. She had been lobbying him for 2 years to rename the bishop. She called it the Traveler. She had a whole argument about it. The bishop moves diagonally across the entire board, covering more distance than any other piece, so why did it have such a boring title? He'd told her the name had been fixed for 500 years. She'd told him 500 years was plenty of time for an update. And then there was Gerald. Gerald was a medieval falcon in a book report Maya had done 3 months ago. She'd read the whole book in a weekend, which was fast even for her. The falcon's name wasn't Gerald in the book. She'd renamed him. When he asked why, she said the original name was too hard to rhyme. He'd pointed out that falconry reports didn't need to rhyme. She'd looked at him like he'd said something obviously wrong and gone back to her writing. 2 weeks later, she announced that the chess bishop should be called Gerald, because Gerald the falcon also moved diagonally when diving, and that was a more interesting reason for a name than anything the original people had come up with. He'd said he would think about it. She was still waiting. He almost smiled at that. Then he got up, turned off the stove light, and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while before sleep came. That was normal. Sleep had always taken its time since Denise. The body reluctant to surrender consciousness when it had learned that nights could turn. You listened for things. For the small changes in breathing that meant you needed to move. For the silence that was slightly wrong. 7 years of listening had changed the way he slept. He didn't resent it. It was just what fatherhood looked like now. He thought about the woman on the 42nd floor, the way she'd reset the pieces without looking. The way she'd played controlled and precise and genuinely skilled until the moment she wasn't. The way she'd looked at him after move 21, not with embarrassment, not with the polite discomfort of someone whose assumptions had been corrected, with something closer to actual recalibration. Like she was revising a conclusion she'd made too quickly and was honest enough with herself to know it. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected dismissal. The pleasant kind or the cold kind, he'd received both in this building. What he hadn't expected was someone willing to sit with being wrong. He closed his eyes. Somewhere down the hall, Maya breathed evenly in the dark. That was enough. That was always enough. The next morning found Lorraine Mitchell at her desk at 7 a.m., 3 things in front of her. Her coffee, her calendar, and the employee database. She would tell herself later that it was standard procedure. Security review, routine verification, all of which was true. She ran background checks on building staff quarterly. This was just earlier than usual. She typed in the name Darnell Cooper. The file loaded. Best information first. 39 years old. No criminal record. Clean driving history. One dependent. She expected all of that. She moved down to employment history and stopped. Previous occupation, professional chess player. She sat up straighter. USCF rating, 2004-2006. She knew enough about chess to understand what that number meant. She opened another tab and searched the USCF database. The records were public. She found him in 30 seconds, Darnell Cooper, Atlanta, Georgia. Tournament history going back to 1998, when he would have been, she did the math, 13 years old. Junior national champion at 15. National Open top 12 finisher 3 years running. A rating that had climbed year by year into territory that put him among the best competitive players in the country. She found a tournament report from 2004. The language was careful, measured. She paraphrased it in her head as she read. A 19-year-old from Atlanta with positional understanding beyond his years, defeating rated players in consecutive rounds. His trajectory pointing toward a national title that seemed inevitable. She sat back. He had been 19 years old and people were writing about him like he was something rare. She kept reading. The records went quiet after 2006. A few scattered tournament appearances in 2007. Then nothing. A gap. 7 years long. She went to public records next. She didn't examine why she was doing this. That was a question for later. When she was less curious, she found what she was looking for in under 10 minutes. Death certificate, Denise Cooper. Age 29. Breast cancer. Survived by husband Darnell and daughter Maya, age 1. 7 years ago, Lorraine set her coffee down. She looked at her screen for a long time. She'd looked at his cart, his coveralls, the quiet, practiced way he moved through the building. And she had constructed a complete story about who he was before he said a single word. She'd been so sure. She was wrong about almost everything. The actual story was this. A man who had been one of the best chess players in the country had walked away from that world at 26 years old. Not because he failed, not because he lost, because his wife got sick and his daughter needed a father who came home at the same time every night, with health insurance and a predictable paycheck, and 2 hands available for whatever needed doing at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. He had chosen a cleaning cart over a career, voluntarily, deliberately. Without, as far as she could tell, ever telling anyone, Lorraine had spent her entire adult life building things. Her father's company, her own reputation, the careful architecture of a professional life that left no room for doubt about what she was worth. She had made sacrifices, relationships, weekends, the quieter version of herself she'd set aside, and she had always framed those sacrifices as the price of ambition. She'd never once considered the sacrifices that had nothing to do with ambition at all. She closed the database, picked up her coffee, sat for a moment in the early morning quiet of a corner office on the 42nd floor, thinking about a man who had tipped his king over at move 21 and simply walked away. She started going down to the lobby at 4:15. She told herself it was the coffee machine. The lobby coffee machine was better than the one on her floor. That was true. It was also true that 4:15 happened to coincide with the start of Darnell's afternoon shift, and that she had looked that up in the building schedule, and that she was not going to examine that too closely. The first time she went down, she was on her phone. She bought coffee. She didn't see him. The second time, she was not on her phone. She saw him coming through the service entrance, cart in front of him, moving toward the elevators with the unhurried precision of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had made his peace with getting there. She almost said nothing. The bishop problem, she said instead. He stopped, turned around. I found it. Move 7, he said. She stared at him. How did you know I found it? You look like someone who went home and replayed the game, did you? He tilted his head slightly. Once or twice. Move 7 was too aggressive, she said. I was playing for control. But I opened a diagonal I didn't need to open. You didn't need to open it, but you wanted to. He studied her for a second. You always want to control the space before you need to. It's the thing that makes you strong and the thing that gets you in trouble. She didn't have a response to that. Not because she disagreed. I replayed the whole game, she said. I couldn't find a line where I win after move 7. Not one. There isn't one, he said it simply. Without apology, the position was lost. You just couldn't feel it yet. The lobby moved around them. People coming in, going out. Nobody paying attention to a woman in a blazer, talking to a man in coveralls by the elevator bank. That invisibility ran both directions. She noticed that. She thought about what it would feel like to live inside it every day. Can I ask you something? He waited. Why did you stop? Chess. Competing, a quiet moment. He didn't look surprised, didn't look offended, just measuring something. I went somewhere, he said. Just not where the tournament circuit expected, your daughter. And before her, her mother. He looked at the elevator doors. Denise got her diagnosis in 2006. I had a tournament scheduled 6 weeks later. A pause. I withdrew. Then I withdrew from the next one. And eventually there weren't any more next ones. Did you regret it? She asked it before she could stop herself. Too direct, too personal, she knew that. But he didn't flinch. Every time I watch Maya breathe through a bad night, he said slowly. And then the morning comes and she's still there. He looked back at Lorraine. No, I don't regret it, he paused. Ask me again when she's not having a bad night. The answer might be more complicated. She absorbed that. I'm sorry, she said. About your wife. Thank you, simple. No deflection. No performance. He received it the way people receive things when they've had a long time to learn how. They talked that day for 11 minutes. She knew because she checked the time when she got back to her desk and counted backward. She came back the next day, and the day after. 7 of the next 9 days. She stopped pretending she was going down for the coffee machine after the 3rd visit. She went because she wanted to. And that was uncomfortable enough that she didn't say it out loud. But she stopped constructing alternative explanations. He told her about Maya. Not heavily. Not the way people tell you about their sick children when they need you to feel the weight. He told her the way people tell you about someone they love, who is also funny and particular and completely themselves. Maya had decided that the chess bishop deserved a better title. Something more interesting. She'd been lobbying for the Traveler for 2 years and showed no signs of giving up. More recently, she'd escalated her campaign. She'd written a 3-paragraph argument comparing the bishop's diagonal movement to the diving arc of a medieval falcon. She'd named Gerald in a school book report. The argument was, technically, sound. He'd told her he would think about it. She'd given him a deadline. Maya read 3 books simultaneously and always knew exactly where she was in all 3. Maya had gone through a phase of speaking only in rhyme for 6 days straight, which had been genuinely impressive until the day she couldn't find a rhyme for inhaler and had a small breakdown about it. Lorraine laughed at that. Actually laughed. The kind that surprised her. She sounds relentless, Lorraine said. She's exactly like her mother. He said it without grief. Just warmth. Plain and solid. The kind that's had time to settle. Denise never let anything go either. She'd pick up an argument from 2 weeks earlier like she'd just set it down. Is that a compliment? Completely. Lorraine told him things too. Not the careful, strategic things she usually told people. Not the professional biography, the talking points about expansion strategy and market position. The other things. That she'd learned chess from her father in the kitchen of their house in Decatur. Sitting across from him on Sunday mornings with rain on the windows. That after he died, she'd kept his board the way other people kept photographs. That she was better at running a company than she'd ever been at being a person. And that she'd spent so many years building one that she wasn't sure anymore where the company ended, and she began. He listened. He didn't try to fix it. Didn't try to reframe it. Didn't steer the conversation toward what he needed from her. He just listened. And it occurred to her that she could count on one hand the people in her life who did that, who listened without eventually arriving at their own agenda. One afternoon, he said it quietly, almost offhandedly. You eat lunch at your desk, every single day. Alone, she looked at him. You should stop doing that, the lunch alone. It accumulates, he said, in a way you don't notice until you look back. He chose his words carefully. People aren't meant to eat alone that many times in a row. She didn't say anything. He nodded once and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She stood by the coffee machine and looked at where he'd been, and thought about the word accumulates. The way he'd used it not as criticism, as observation, the way you'd describe weather to someone who hadn't been outside. She went back upstairs. She did not eat lunch alone the next day. She had Angela Young bring a second chair into her office. They ate together while Angela talked about her nephew's soccer game. Lorraine actually listened, not cataloging information, just listening. And it was unexpectedly a better afternoon. On the 9th day, Darnell said, You should come up sometime. With the board, she raised an eyebrow. You want a rematch? I want you to understand the position you couldn't see. The one I found from the doorway. That might take more than one game. Then it takes more than one game. He looked at her for a moment. That steady, measuring look she was starting to recognize. Not calculation, not suspicion. The look of a man who took things seriously and wanted to understand what he was looking at before. He moved. Okay, he said. She nodded. He went up to his floor. She went back to 42. And neither of them mentioned the fact that the next Thursday, the one day she always left at 6, Lorraine stayed until 8:45. It was a Wednesday when everything changed. She was in the parking structure at 5:58. 2 minutes ahead of her usual schedule. The garage was half empty at this hour. The lower level still held the cars of people working late. She heard Maya first. Actually, she heard the inhaler, the compressed hiss of it, then the small, terrible sound that followed the labored pulling of breath that wasn't coming right. She'd never heard that sound before. But she knew immediately what it was. You didn't need experience. You just needed to hear it once. She came around the concrete pillar and saw them. Darnell was on one knee beside the passenger door of an old Civic. And Maya, 8 years old, a girl she recognized from a photograph on his phone, was leaning against the seat with her lips going the wrong color. Not quite blue, not yet, but moving towards something no child's lips should be. Darnell was talking to a dispatcher. Calm voice, dangerously calm. The calm of someone who had made this call before and knew exactly which words mattered. Severe asthmatic episode. She's using accessory muscles to breathe. I need a unit at the Whitmore building parking structure. Ground level, south entrance. Lorraine was already on her phone. No decision, no pause. Just her voice, the one she used in board meetings when something needed to happen in the next 30 seconds. And her name, which in Atlanta opened certain doors. This is Lorraine Mitchell. I need an EMS unit at the Whitmore Group parking structure immediately. Pediatric respiratory emergency. I need the barriers down and a clear path from the south entrance to the street. Get me the floor supervisor. She got the floor supervisor. She got the barriers down. Darnell looked up at her from where he was kneeling. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Maya. She crouched down. Not baby talk, not performance, just clear and level. Hey. I'm Lorraine. I'm your dad's friend. The ambulance is coming and you're going to be okay. Can you look at me? Maya looked at her. Even in the middle of a body that was fighting itself, her eyes were alert. Present, she had her father's eyes. That same quality of seeing clearly regardless of conditions. Keep looking at me, Lorraine said. Right here, don't worry about anything else. The ambulance took 6 minutes. It felt longer. Everything felt longer. Darnell stayed at Maya's side, one hand on her back, the other holding hers. And Lorraine stayed on the other side and kept talking. Nothing important, just sound, just presence. Something for Maya to anchor to that wasn't the fear. When the paramedics arrived, they were fast. Within 3 minutes, Maya was on oxygen. Within 5, the color was coming back to her lips. Darnell stood up, and for 1 second, just one, his composure shifted. Not dramatically, not a collapse. His shoulders dropped an inch. The way a person's do when they've been holding something by force of will alone, and their will needs exactly 1 moment to exhale. Then he straightened. He climbed into the ambulance beside the stretcher. At the door, he turned and looked at Lorraine. He didn't say anything. She nodded at him. The doors closed. She stood in the parking structure in the empty silence after the siren faded and thought, I'm following them. She didn't examine that. She just picked up her keys. The waiting room at the hospital smelled like disinfectant and recycled air. She sat in a plastic chair and did not work, did not check email, did not make a plan or a list or a next step. She sat and occasionally looked at her phone for the time. She didn't know exactly what she was waiting for, except that leaving felt impossible in a way she couldn't name and wasn't going to try to. 3 hours later, Darnell came through the door. He looked stripped down. The layer of controlled steadiness he carried constant, considered had thinned in the last 3 hours to where she could see through it. Not broken. Just thin. She's okay, he said, responding well. They want to watch her overnight. She should be home tomorrow. Lorraine exhaled. Good. He sat down in the chair next to hers, not the one across, the one directly beside her. He sat there for a moment with his elbows on his knees and his hands open between them. He looked at the floor. Thank you, he said. I didn't do much. He looked at him. He was still looking at the floor, but she could hear what he meant. Not the call she'd made, not the barriers she'd cleared. Those were logistics, those were the easy part. He meant the plastic chair, the 3 hours, the fact that she was still there when he came out. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. They sat in the fluorescent quiet of a hospital waiting room while the night got later around them. And somewhere down the hall, a child breathed steadily into a mask, and Lorraine Mitchell stopped looking for a reason why she'd stayed. Some things you don't need a reason for, you just stay. The video was 90 seconds long. Darnell watched it twice on his phone in the parking lot of Maya's school at 7:43 in the morning, sitting in the Civic with the engine still running and the heat on, because October had turned cold overnight. 3 days had passed since the hospital. Maya was home, breathing well, back to her books and her arguments about chess piece nomenclature. He'd dropped her at school 20 minutes ago and sat in the parking lot because he didn't trust himself to walk into the building looking like he felt. The footage was grainy. Shot through glass. Someone with a phone and too much time and not enough conscience had stood in the hallway outside the 42nd floor conference room and recorded the whole thing. The chess game compressed into 30 seconds of shaky footage. Then Lorraine's voice clear enough to understand every word. Beat me and I'll marry you. And then him sitting down. And then 21 moves reduced to a caption. When the chess janitor checkmates the CEO. Is this legally binding? Laughing emojis. Rows of them. He scrolled down one line. One line was enough. That janitor saw his meal ticket and played his hand perfectly. Gold digger with a chess set. He put the phone face down on the passenger seat. Sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The school bell rang somewhere inside the building. Faint through the glass. He could picture Maya in her classroom right now. Settling into her chair. Pulling out her notebook, the green one she'd picked because green was the color of Go. She had her mother's thing for small systems. Small rituals. The green notebook was this week's. Last month it had been yellow. She didn't know about the video. He was going to make sure she didn't know about the video. He checked the upload timestamp. The clip had gone up 2 days ago, the night after the chess game, 3 weeks back now. It had moved slowly at first, the way things do when they haven't found the right current. Then something shifted. A larger account shared it, then another. The caption changed with each repost, getting sharper, more reductive, more certain about what kind of man he was. By the time Terry Coleman texted him from across town, it had already been picked up on the company's internal platform and was running through Whitmore Group like water through a cracked foundation. He pulled out of the parking lot and drove to work. The building felt different when he arrived. That was the thing about working in a place where you'd been unseen for years. When people suddenly decided to look, you felt it before you could explain it. Small things. The receptionist on 12, who had never once glanced up from her screen, looked today. 2 men from accounting walked past him in the hallway and went quiet mid-sentence. Not hostile, just aware. They knew. Of course they knew. He pushed his cart to the service elevator, pressed the button, waited. The doors opened, 3 people inside. They stepped back slightly when he got on. He faced forward. The doors closed. No one spoke. He got off on 7 and started his floor, and thought, this is manageable. This is just a day. You have had harder days than this. The hard days were the ones where Maya couldn't breathe, and the hospital was 40 minutes away, and the insurance company wanted 3 business days to authorize treatment she needed right now. This was embarrassment. He could survive embarrassment. By noon, the video had left the company platform entirely. He found that out from a text from Terry Coleman, who worked at a warehouse across town and had no connection to Whitmore Group whatsoever. Bro, is this you? Attached was a screenshot from somewhere else entirely. The caption on this version was shorter. Sharper, when the chess janitor actually checkmates the CEO into marriage. 47,000 views. Darnell read that number. Put his phone away. Ate his lunch, a sandwich he'd made at 5:30 that morning, because the cafeteria felt exposed right now in the supply room on the 4th floor, where nobody came unless they needed paper towels. He ate and looked at the shelf and tried to think about nothing in particular. The comment was still in his head. The first one he'd read. Gold digger with a chess set. Not because it hurt him specifically. He'd been dismissed by people who knew him far better, and it had stung less. What sat in his chest and wouldn't move was something else. Maya's name had started appearing in the comment threads. Small things at first. Then someone had found the public school enrollment records, found the medical documentation she'd had to submit and had posted a comment calling Maya's asthma a convenient prop. That was the word they used. Convenient. He finished his sandwich, folded the bag, put it in his pocket because the supply room didn't have a trash can. Went back to work. That evening, Maya came home from school with her green notebook and her reading books and sat down at the kitchen table across from him with the focused expression she used when she had something to report. Amara's mom told Amara's grandma, she said, and Amara told me at recess. He set down his coffee. What did Amara tell you? That you beat the boss lady at chess and now it's on the internet. She arranged the pieces on Denise's board with the precise, unhurried movements she'd inherited from somewhere. Did you actually beat her in 3 moves like they're saying? 21 moves, Maya considered this. That's still fast. She's a good player? Yes, but you're better. In that game, yes. She moved a pawn without looking up. Is she nice? He looked at his daughter across the board. 8 years old. Denise's way of asking questions that sounded simple and landed somewhere else entirely. Yeah, he said. She's nice. Maya nodded like this confirmed something she'd already decided. Okay, she said. I just wanted to know. She moved another piece without ceremony. Your turn, Dad. He moved a pawn. They played in comfortable quiet after that. No more questions. But that night, after Maya was asleep, Darnell sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold and thought about what the word nice actually covered. Whether it was the right word for a woman who had sat in a plastic hospital chair for 3 hours without being asked and without explaining herself. He didn't find a better word. He went to bed. Upstairs on 42, Lorraine had known about the video for 4 hours before she made herself watch it. That was its own specific kind of dread. The knowledge that something bad existed before you had to confront it. The way you can feel a headache building before the pain fully arrives. Angela Young knocked at 8 a.m. with the expression she reserved for situations that couldn't be managed by rescheduling. There's a situation. Lorraine looked up from the contract she'd been reviewing. Define situation. Angela put her phone on the desk. Lorraine watched the video. All 90 seconds of it. She watched herself say, "Beat me, and I'll marry you," in the voice she used in board presentations, confident. Almost bored, the voice of someone who had never once considered losing. She watched Darnell sit down. She watched herself lose. The comment section loaded automatically at the end. She read 4 comments before she placed the phone face down on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment. How many people have seen it on the internal platform? Approximately 400. It's been removed. But it's already outside, yes, she nodded. Slow and deliberate. Who posted it? We're looking into that. Find out today. Yes, Angela didn't move. There's more. Of course there was, Mr. Bryant called. Your uncle. He's requesting an emergency board conversation. Angela paused carefully. And there were 3 messages from business press. 2 local, 1 national. Lorraine picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Book the board call for 2 o'clock, she said. Tell the press no comment for now. Close the door on your way out. Angela closed the door. Lorraine sat in the quiet of her office and looked out at Atlanta. The skyline she'd watched from this window for 6 years. The city that had been her father's and then became hers. The view she'd always thought of as proof of something, and she felt an unfamiliar sensation. Cornered, not by the video itself. A video was manageable. Embarrassing, yes. A disruption, yes. But manageable. She'd navigated worse optics than a chess game. What cornered her was the comment section. What cornered her was seeing Darnell reduced to a caption, a punchline, a predatory stereotype wearing coveralls and carrying a chess rating. The man who had sat across from her and listened, who had told her she ate lunch alone too many times in a row and it accumulates. Who had steadied his voice on the phone with a dispatcher while his daughter's lips went the wrong color, and had straightened his shoulders within 30 seconds. Because there was an ambulance to meet, and he didn't have the luxury of falling apart in a parking garage. That man, flattened into gold digger with a chess set. She sat with that longer than she should have. Then the phone rang. Victor Bryant had the kind of voice that had never learned to lower itself. 62 years old, chairman of the board, and the only person in her professional life who had known her when she was 12 and still, occasionally behaved as though she still was. His voice on the 2 o'clock call filled the conference room like he was already in it. Lorraine, what the hell is this? Good afternoon, Victor. Don't do the professional voice with me right now. I have 3 board members calling me this morning, asking whether my niece has lost her mind. I need to know what I'm dealing with. You're dealing with a private moment that someone recorded without consent and posted without authorization. We've removed it from company platforms. Legal is reviewing options. The moment, Lorraine. The actual content of the moment. You were in a company conference room at 9 p.m., making what sounded like it was poorly phrased, she said. It was not a binding offer. It was not a policy violation. And the chess game that followed was 2 adults playing chess. A pause. You know who that man is? His name is Darnell Cooper. He does excellent work and has never given anyone reason for concern. She paused. I know he beat me at chess, which I deserved, because I made an arrogant assumption about his ability, and he corrected it with 21 moves. Another pause. People are going to say I've seen the comments. Her voice stayed even, but something underneath it sharpened. I'm not going to make personnel or personal decisions based on comment sections. That's not how I run this company. I'm calling an all-board meeting. Friday, I'll be there. You should think very carefully between now and then about what image you want this company to project. I always do, she ended the call. Sat in the conference room with the phone face down and the Atlanta skyline out the window. The silence that follows a conversation you've won on points and lost something in anyway. She thought about Darnell somewhere in this building right now. Probably somewhere out of the way, eating lunch alone, reading the same comments she'd read. She should call him. She should what? Warn him. He already knew. Apologize for what? For existing, for talking to him, for 90 seconds of footage that neither of them had created. She picked up the phone, put it down again, went back to work. 4 days passed. She went down to the lobby at 4:15 on Wednesday. Nobody by the coffee machine except the regular crowd. People she didn't know. The marble atrium sounded the same as it always had. But something was missing from it now that she hadn't known, was there until it was gone. She bought her coffee and went back upstairs and didn't examine that too closely either. It was a Friday when she saw him again. He was covering the 42nd floor, filling in for a colleague whose schedule had shifted. Not his usual assignment, not his choice, just the way the roster fell. He was working the executive hallway at 5:45 when he heard her coming, not on her phone in person. Moving with the velocity she carried when something was pulling her attention from multiple directions, and she was managing all of them at once. He'd watched her move through this building for weeks. He knew that pace. She came around the corner, saw him, stopped. He stopped too. The hallway was empty. The overhead lights made everything flat and factual. No shadows, no softening. Darnell, Miss Mitchell. Something moved across her face. The formality of the title. The distance it placed between them that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. I've been meaning to reach out, she said. The video, there's a lot of pressure right now. And I want you to know that none of it reflects, I know. I just want to make sure you understand that I don't hold any of this against I know, he said again. She stopped, looked at him, and something in her face shifted. Something that had been carefully managed for 4 days through board calls and press inquiries. And Victor's voice filling conference rooms started to come through the management. Not cracking, leaking. The small kind. Someone wrote that Maya was a prop, she said quietly. He looked at her. I saw that comment, she said. I had it removed. I had our legal team flag the account. Her voice was level. But something underneath it moved. I want you to know I saw it and I acted on it immediately. I know you did, he said the same words. But weighted differently, she exhaled. And then because she'd been managing things for 4 days, and management is exhausting, and the hallway was empty, and he was standing right in front of her, and she'd been trying to reach him for days without quite reaching him, she asked the wrong thing. Did you know someone was recording that night? Before you sat down? He heard it land, felt the shape of it. Not quite a question, an accusation dressed in a question's clothes. The way accusations dress when the person isn't fully committed to asking but can't hold it back anymore. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. There are people saying this was planned. That. And you're asking if they're right. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He nodded once. Something in his chest settled into a position he recognized. The position of a man who'd spent years being underestimated and had made a certain kind of peace with it. He'd thought he'd made that peace completely. He hadn't. What do you see when you look at me? He said. She blinked. Right now. Standing here. What do you see, Lorraine? Because I want to understand. I want to understand what you actually see when you stop being Lorraine, who I talked to at 4:15, and start being Lorraine Mitchell, CEO. Because those two people see me very differently, and I've been trying to figure out which one I've actually been talking to. The hallway held the silence. She opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing came that was enough. He could see her reaching for something sufficient and not finding it. And he understood that. It didn't make the not finding any easier to stand inside. I don't think you planned it, she said finally. But you asked. I had to ask. You didn't have to ask me. He kept his voice quiet. Even, you chose to. There's a difference. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at the board after move 14. Knowing something had gone wrong. Searching for when I should get back to my floor, he said. Darnell, have a good evening, Miss Mitchell. He pushed his cart down the hallway. He didn't look back. Not as performance, not to make a point. Just because looking back wasn't going to help either of them. And he'd learned a long time ago that the way you leave a hard moment is the thing that travels with you afterward, not the moment itself. He took the service elevator down. The doors closed. He stood in the humming quiet of the descending car and thought about the word planned, and thought about the word chose, and thought about whether there was really a difference in the end between being dismissed and being suspected. Same position, different move order. Same outcome. The week that followed was quiet, in the way that follows a door closing. Darnell requested a shift adjustment back to his original floors, his original schedule. The 42nd floor coverage had been temporary anyway. He was returning to what had always been his. He worked his CA, cleaned his floors, took the service elevator at hours when the traffic was light. He did not think about the 42nd floor. He thought about it constantly. He thought about the look on her face when she said, I had to ask. And he thought about the distinction between had to and chose to. And he thought about how those feel identical from the inside when you're scared and feel completely different from the outside when you're the one being asked. He didn't think she was a bad person. That almost would have been simpler. She was someone with pressure coming from every direction who had aimed it for one moment at the nearest person. He understood how that happened. What he couldn't move past was the specific direction of the question, the angle of it, what it revealed about where her mind went first when she was frightened, underneath the lobby conversations, and the coffee machine, and the 9 afternoons. Underneath all of that, when the pressure arrived, she still looked at his coveralls first, maybe without knowing it. Maybe she hadn't understood she was doing it. That didn't change what she'd done. He went to work. He came home. He made rice and chicken on Tuesday. He helped Maya with a book report about a girl who trained falcons in medieval England, the same book Gerald had come from. The one she'd read 3 months ago that had somehow gotten worked into every conversation since. The report required him to learn a surprising amount about medieval falconry at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. Gerald is not a medieval name, he said. Gerald is whatever name I want him to be, she said. It's my report. He thought about that for a moment. Fair enough, he said. She grinned. Denise's grin, the same angle. He looked at his daughter and thought, this grin at 10 p.m. over a book report about a falcon named Gerald. This is why the rest of it is manageable. This is what all the math is for. The board meeting was already wrong when she walked in. She knew from the seating. The way people arrange themselves around a table tells you everything about what's been decided before anyone speaks. Open configurations, chairs not fully pulled in. Shoulders loose mean the room is still in play. Closed configurations mean the conclusion arrived before you did. This room was closed. Victor sat at the head of the table. Her seat, she noted that without commenting on it, took the chair to his left with the same ease she brought to every room she entered. Unwilling to let the geography mean what he intended it to mean. Thank you for coming, Victor said. I always come, she said. He opened the folder in front of him. The board has been in discussion about the events of the past several weeks, the video, the public attention. The questions raised about executive judgment and conduct. He paused, the pause of someone who has rehearsed this. We've taken a vote. She looked around the table. 6 faces, some uncomfortable. 2 of them, Patterson and Reeves, both of whom had known her father, both of whom had watched her rebuild what he'd built into something larger, looking at the folder rather than at her. Those 2 had voted against. She could do the math without being told. The board has voted to temporarily suspend your executive authority, pending an internal review, Victor said. This is not a termination, it is a precautionary. Who voted? Silence. I want the count. Lorraine, the count. He held her gaze for a moment. 4-2, 4-2. Patterson and Reeves against. 4 others, the ones Victor had been on the phone with for 2 weeks, the ones who measured everything against quarterly optics and client perception and the kind of headlines that made earnings calls uncomfortable, had voted yes-est. She sat with that number for exactly 3 seconds. On what grounds? Use of company resources for personal purposes. The emergency call during the parking structure incident, used to clear a path for an EMS unit responding to a child in respiratory distress. She kept her voice entirely level. A child on company property. I cleared the garage barriers and established a direct route to the street. I used building operations to support an active medical emergency. And the board's position is that this constitutes misuse of resources. No one answered. Because there was no answer available that didn't sound like what it was. Additionally, Victor said, the perception issues arising from the personal. What personal relationship? The video shows me playing chess with a building employee at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, as a private adult in a private moment that was recorded without my consent by someone who will be hearing from our legal department. She looked at her uncle directly. Which personal relationship are you referring to, Victor? Be specific. He held her gaze. The board believes your judgment may be compromised. My judgment, she said. My judgment has grown this company from $212 million in annual revenue to $840 million in 6 years. My judgment has secured 4 of our 7 largest client relationships in the past 30 months. My judgment has been the single most consistent variable in every meaningful outcome this company has produced since my father died. She paused. And you're questioning it because I sat in a hospital waiting room. The room was very quiet. Patterson looked up from the table. 71 years old. He'd played golf with her father every Saturday for a decade. He looked at her, then at Victor, then back down at his folder. His jaw moved slightly. He didn't speak. The vote stands, Victor said. She nodded. She reached into her jacket pocket, took out her key card, set it on the table in front of her. Not a slam, not theater, just placement. Clean and deliberate. I'll need the review terms in writing, she said. Legal will want them by end of day. She stood. Lorraine, I'll see myself out, she said. She walked out of the boardroom with the posture she'd carried into every difficult room for 15 years. Straight. Unhurried. The posture that said I have made my decision and I am at peace with it, and none of you are going to see anything different on my face. She held it until the elevator doors closed behind her. Then she leaned back against the wall of the car, let out one long breath, straightened before the doors opened at the lobby, walked through the marble atrium and out the front doors and into the Atlanta morning, which was cold and indifferent and entirely unconcerned with what had just happened 42 floors above it. She didn't go home. She drove for a while, not toward anything specific, down Peachtree, across to the west side, through neighborhoods she knew well and ones she didn't. Through parts of the city that were changing fast and parts that had stayed exactly themselves for decades. She pulled over on a street she didn't know particularly well and called Angela. Are you okay? Angela answered, because Angela always led with the thing that actually mattered. I've been suspended, I know. I heard from Patterson's assistant 20 minutes ago, a pause shorter. What do you need? Lorraine looked out the window at an ordinary Atlanta street going about its ordinary morning. A woman walking a dog. A kid on a bike cutting through the cold. The unremarkable continuity of a city that didn't stop for board votes. I need to know something, she said. The Chess Association, the Atlanta one on Peachtree Industrial. Did they contact Darnell Cooper at some point in the past several months? A longer pause. How did they? Did they, Angela? Angela was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, several months before the video, a head coaching position. I found out because they called building HR to verify his employment, which flagged in the system and came to me. What happened? He declined. Lorraine had known. She'd known from the moment she started asking. But knowing and hearing it stated plainly were different weights on the chest. Did he say why? There was an email. HR forwarded it because of the original flag on the call. Angela's voice went careful the way it did when she was carrying something on someone else's behalf. I can read it to you, please, the sound of Angela pulling something up. Then quietly, thank you for the offer. The position is more than I'd hoped for, and I'm grateful for the consideration. Maya needs consistency right now more than I need opportunity. That calculus doesn't change. I hope you'll consider me again when her health is more stable. D. Cooper. Lorraine did not say anything. Lorraine, I'm here. There's something else. She waited the shift change, Angela said. When he moved off the 42nd floor coverage last week, he submitted the request himself. Yes, but the request came the morning after he received a memo from the building services contractor. Angela's voice went very even, requesting his reassignment to a different property entirely. The memo cited a conflict of interest concern. The air in the car changed. Who sent the memo? It came through an external request, filed through the contractor's compliance channel. A breath. It was submitted by Victor Bryant's office. Lorraine closed her eyes. Opened them. He knew, she said. Not a question. He received the contractor memo the morning after Maya's hospital visit. The same morning he submitted the shift change request. He moved himself. Lorraine said. Yes, he found out Victor pushed for his removal. And instead of calling me, he quietly requested the transfer himself, so I wouldn't have to deal with it. Yes, she sat with the specific shape of that. Victor Bryant had reached outside the company and applied pressure to a man's livelihood, a man who had done nothing wrong to make a problem disappear. And Darnell had felt that pressure arrive, had understood immediately where it came from, had absorbed it without saying a word to her, had signed his own transfer to protect her from having to deal with it the way he did everything that cost him something. Quickly. Without making it anyone else's problem. Thank you, Angela, she said. She started the car. She didn't go home first. She used the key card, the one she'd set on the table, and then picked back up when she stood. The small gesture Victor apparently hadn't registered to access the 42nd floor. Walked past her own office without slowing. Knocked once on Victor's door and opened it without waiting. He was on the phone. He looked up. She sat down across his desk and waited. He finished the call in under a minute, put the phone down, looked at her with the expression of someone who expected this arrival and had hoped for more time before it came. You interfered with a contracted employee, she said. No greeting, no preamble. You submitted a conflict of interest request to the building services contractor to have Darnell Cooper reassigned to another property. That contractor operates under an agreement with this company that includes a non-interference clause in personnel decisions. She placed a folder on his desk. Our legal team confirmed the clause applies. They confirmed it this morning. Victor looked at the folder. Didn't touch it. I was protecting the company. You were protecting your discomfort. Those aren't the same thing, Lorraine. He knew, she said. He received the contractor memo. And instead of calling me or contesting it, or doing anything that would have made this harder for me, he quietly signed the transfer request so I wouldn't have to deal with it. She held her uncle's gaze. He protected me from you, Victor, and you made him do it by going after someone who had nothing to do with any of this. Her uncle looked at her across the desk. 62 years old, her father's jaw, her grandmother's eyes. She had spent her whole life in the particular complicated space between loving someone and being limited by them. I was trying to simplify the situation, he said. You reached into a man's livelihood because his presence inconvenienced you. I was looking out for. Your father asked me to look after you, he said it quietly. Not as a defense, as the truth underneath the defense. I know that's not what this looks like, but that's what it was. She looked at him. The Atlanta skyline sat in the window behind him, indifferent and enormous. She had spent her whole life loving this man in the complicated way you love someone who means well and causes damage in equal measure. Then look after me differently, she said. Don't tell me what you were looking out for. I know what you were looking out for. She stood. The review proceeds. I'll comply fully, but I need you to hear me say this clearly, Victor. Don't do that again. Don't use your position in this company to move people around because they make you uncomfortable. Not with contractors, not with vendors, not with anyone. Not ever again. He was quiet for a moment. Understood, he said. Not an apology. Not a concession. Just received. It was enough. For now. For this, she picked up her folder and walked out. She sat in her car in the parking structure for a few minutes. 42 floors above her, the review process was already in motion. It would take weeks. There would be meetings and paperwork and the slow, careful process of an organization protecting itself. Let it. She had done what she could do from inside that room. She would do what was required when it was required. Right now she had something more important. She reached for her phone to call Darnell, then stopped. Put the phone down. He didn't want her call right now. She knew that. Not after the hallway. Not after the question she'd asked that she couldn't unask. Calling him now, explaining herself, justifying herself, arriving with information and expecting it to fix what she'd broken that was still about her. Still about making herself feel better. He needed time. She would give him time. She drove home. 4 days later, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, everything changed again. She was awake when Angela's text came through. She'd been awake for an hour, lying in the dark the way she did sometimes when the day had been too much to put down cleanly. Her phone was on the nightstand. The screen lit up. Maya is at Grady. Thought you'd want to know. Lorraine was in her car before she finished reading the sentence. She didn't analyze that. She didn't need to. The drive from her apartment to Grady Memorial took 19 minutes at that hour. She knew because she counted. She parked in the emergency structure and walked in through the main entrance and found the waiting area and sat down in a plastic chair. She did not announce herself to anyone, did not call ahead, did not manage or plan or orchestrate. She just sat. An hour passed. Then too, she thought about the email Angela had read to her. Maya needs consistency right now more than I need opportunity. That calculus doesn't change. 7 years of running that calculation. Every decision filtered through the same equation. And never once, as far as she could tell, had the equation produced a version where Darnell Cooper came out on the right side of it. She thought about what that cost. Not the career, not the tournaments, not the rating that had been climbing towards something rare before it simply stopped. The other cost. The one that accumulates in a way you don't notice until you look back. At 2 in the morning, the door opened. Darnell came through it. He looked stripped down in a different way than after the parking garage. That night he'd been shaken and held it together. Tonight he'd been holding it together, so long the holding itself had worn through. He looked like a man who had carried something very heavy for a very long distance and was running out of road. He saw her. Stopped. She stood. How is she? Stable. His voice was steady, carefully steady. They're keeping her until morning. Dr. Anderson says the current medication is slowing down, taking longer to work each time. He looked at the floor. There's a newer treatment, better outcomes, not covered by insurance. She knew what that meant. She knew the math without him saying the numbers. Can I see her? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved between them, the question she'd asked in the hallway, the days of silence, the things she'd said that she couldn't take back, and the things she'd done tonight that she hadn't needed to be asked to do. All of it, present in the space between them. Yeah, he said. Come on. Maya was awake. Barely. The oxygen mask covered most of her face. The monitor clipped to her finger cast a pale light across the blanket. She looked small the way she always looked small in hospital beds, which was not a reflection of who she was anywhere else. Because in real life she was enormous in the way that people who fill every room they enter are enormous. But here, in a gown sized for someone older, with equipment attached to her, she looked exactly 8 years old. Lorraine sat in the chair against the wall, not the one beside the bed. That one was Darnell's. The chair against the wall, far enough to leave him his space. Close enough to be present, Darnell sat and took Maya's hand. Maya opened her eyes, looked at her father, then looked at Lorraine. She didn't seem surprised. She just looked for a moment, that direct, unhurried look she'd inherited from somewhere, and then she closed her eyes again, and Lorraine sat. The room was quiet except for the machines running their patient work. Outside the window, Atlanta was doing what it always did, moving. Lit up, entirely indifferent to what was happening in this room. 2 in the morning. The city didn't know and didn't care that a man was sitting beside his daughter's bed running numbers without solutions. And a woman who had asked the wrong question 10 days ago was sitting against the wall saying nothing at all, which was right now exactly the right thing. Darnell didn't say thank you. She hadn't come here for thank you. He sat with his hand over his daughter's and his eyes on the monitor, and she sat against the wall, and neither of them moved, and the numbers held, and Maya breathed, and the night got later around them. Outside, Atlanta kept going. Inside this room, 2 people sat in the specific silence that comes after. Something has been tested and hasn't broken yet, and neither of them was ready to name what that meant. The numbers held. Maya breathed. That was enough. Darnell drove home at 6:43. Maya was in the back seat, head against the window, asleep in the particular committed way she slept. Like sleep was something she'd decided to do completely and wasn't interested in doing halfway. Her breathing was even, real. The kind of sound he'd spent 7 years listening for in the dark, cataloging its quality the way other people catalog weather. Is it better or worse than yesterday? Is it the breathing of someone who will still be there in the morning? Tonight it was good breathing. He let himself believe that. He drove slowly. Not because of traffic. The roads were nearly empty at this hour. Atlanta still in the last stretch of its own night. The highway overpasses lit amber against a sky going from black to the particular gray that comes just before dawn commits to anything. He drove slowly because he didn't want to arrive anywhere yet. He wanted to stay inside this moment. The car, the quiet, the sound of his daughter breathing behind him. He'd been awake for 19 hours. He felt it in a specific way, not the heavy drag of ordinary tiredness, but the sharp, stripped-down clarity that comes when exhaustion burns away everything non-essential and leaves you with only what actually matters. No padding, no buffer between you and the real things. Just the real things sitting right there in front of you, where you can't look past them. Maya mattered. That was the list. It had always been the list. He carried her upstairs. She barely woke, made one small sound, and resettled her head against his shoulder. He put her in her bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, stood in her doorway the way he'd stood in it thousands of times. The glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling were still faintly going, 8 hours into their fade. Barely visible now. Just enough light to remind you they were there. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table next to Denise's chess set, the plain two-toned pieces arranged in their starting positions, because Maya always reset the board when they finished playing. Another small ritual she'd invented for herself. She never explained why, she just did it. He'd asked once. She'd said, the pieces deserve to start over. He'd thought about that for 3 days. Dr. Anderson's number was still in his recent calls. The conversation from 1 a.m. was still sitting in his chest like something swallowed wrong. The current protocol is losing effectiveness. Each episode takes longer to stabilize. The new treatment shows significantly better outcomes in cases like Maya's. Fewer acute episodes. Better long-term lung function than the number. $9,600 per year, out of pocket. After insurance, he did the math again. The same math he'd been doing for 7 years with different numbers but always the same shape. Income minus fixed expenses minus Maya's current medical costs minus the emergency fund that kept getting used for emergencies. Then the new number dropped in. The math didn't change. The answer was the same. He put the phone face down on the table and drank his coffee in the early quiet and thought about what a person was supposed to do when they'd already done everything available to them, and it still came up short. He didn't have a new answer. He'd been looking for one for 7 years, and the search had taught him mostly that some problems don't have solutions, they just have the next morning. He went to work anyway. Because that was the nature of this life. It didn't pause for the nights that cost you something. It just waited at the edge of those nights and resumed the moment you came back. Lorraine hadn't gone home after Darnell left with Maya. After the doctors cleared her. After he'd buckled her into the back seat with the particular careful tenderness of a man who'd been frightened for 6 hours and wasn't going to let her see it. Lorraine had sat in the hospital parking lot in her car, 20 minutes. Not crying, not on her phone, not making a plan or a list or a next step, just sitting in the dark with the engine off and the windows slowly fogging at the edges. She'd said I had to ask. She'd said it, and she'd meant it in the moment, and she'd watched his face receive it not with anger, which she could have worked with, but with something quieter and more permanent. The way a door closes when the temperature drops. Not slammed, just sealed, and she had done nothing about it for 10 days. She'd managed the board, the press, Victor's voice in every conference room. She'd managed all of it and filed him under address later, and later had stretched into 10 days, and then it was 2 in the morning. And Angela had sent, Maya is at Grady, and Lorraine had been in her car before she finished reading the sentence. She knew what that meant. She'd known for longer than she'd been willing to say out loud. Now she sat in the parking lot at 6:15 in the morning. Sky going grey-pink over the hospital structure. The city waking up around her in the slow incremental way. Cities wake a truck here, a light there, The particular sound of Atlanta deciding to be Atlanta again after a night of being quiet about it. She said it out loud. To no one. To the dashboard. To the city that didn't care. I am completely in love with this man. She sat with that. Which was not a comfortable place to sit. Because loving someone was one thing, and loving someone who had every reason to keep that door closed was a different problem entirely. She had asked that question in the hallway. She couldn't unask it. The look on his face not angry. Something quieter and more precise than anger was going to stay with her. But she had shown up. She had sat against that wall for 4 hours, without being asked, without explaining herself, without needing anything from him in return. She didn't know if it was enough. She knew it was true, and true was what she had. She started the car. She had work to do. And after the work, she had something more important than work, which was not a sentence she had said to herself very many times in the past 6 years and meant it. She made 3 stops that morning. She didn't go home first. She drove from the hospital parking lot with the windows still slightly fogged, and her coffee from the hospital vending machine going cold in the cup holder. And she made her first call before she reached the highway. The first stop was Greystone Elementary. She'd called ahead. She did almost nothing without calling ahead. That was one thing the past month had not changed about her. She asked to speak with Maya's teacher. Miss Patricia Johnson met her in the front office with the warm, unhurried manner of someone who had been paying close attention to her students for 20 years and had learned to trust the information she gathered from simply watching them. Maya is one of my favorites, Miss Johnson said, and Lorraine believed her. Specifically, not generically. The way she said it carried the weight of someone who meant a particular child when they said a particular thing. Her mind moved sideways in the best way. She'll be working through a math problem and suddenly she's explaining why certain numbers feel different from other numbers. She smiled. She's not wrong exactly. She just sees patterns that other kids walk right past. Like her father, Lorraine said. Mrs. Johnson raised an eyebrow. Is that right? He does the same thing? He does. He just doesn't narrate it. That sounds about right. She looked at Lorraine with the particular assessment of a woman who had learned to read people quickly and trust what she found. What can I do for you? Lorraine told her what she needed. Not much, just information she could have found other ways, but wanted to hear from someone who knew Maya as a person rather than as a file. Miss Johnson gave her what she asked for. Quiet, direct, no performance. The academic history, the attendance record, the pattern of absences that mapped directly onto the pattern of bad nights, the invisible tax that Maya's lungs had been collecting from her education for 3 years. The learning she'd had to reconstruct on her own, after each episode, the gaps she'd filled through sheer determination, because she was her father's daughter and her mother's daughter, and giving up was not in her vocabulary, even when her body made everything harder. Lorraine thanked her and left. She sat in her car outside the school for a moment and looked at the notes she'd written. Then she folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket and drove. The second stop was the medical center. The meeting with Dr. Sandra Anderson took just over an hour. They went through the treatment protocol in detail, the clinical outcomes, the trial data, the insurance gap and why it existed, and what it would take to close it for one patient versus what it would take to make it irrelevant for an entire category of patients. Lorraine listened to all of it. She asked specific questions. She took notes. She was, as she had always been in rooms that required her to understand things precisely, very good at this. At the end of it, she took out her checkbook. Dr. Anderson watched her write. She looked at the header on the check, then at Lorraine. The Whitmore Group Employee Family Health Initiative. We're establishing it, Lorraine said. Retroactive to last month. It covers contracted building services employees and their immediate dependents for specialized treatment not included in standard insurance plans. She paused. Maya Cooper is the first enrolled dependent. Dr. Anderson looked at her over the check with an expression that was harder to read than Lorraine had expected. That's a significant commitment, she said. It's policy, Lorraine said. It should have been policy a long time ago. She said it plainly, without performance. Because that was what it was. Not a gesture. Not a check that could feel like an apology wrapped in a dollar amount. Not charity delivered to one person to ease one conscience. Something permanent and structural. Something that didn't stop being true when the feeling that created it faded. 47 contracted building employees were eligible. The number was already calculated. It had been sitting in a spreadsheet Angela had built 3 days ago. Because Angela always built the spreadsheet before she was asked. A policy meant that the next Darnell Cooper, the next person, doing work that kept everything running while remaining invisible to the people whose building it was, wouldn't have to choose between the treatment their child needed and the cost of providing it. That was what it meant. That was what it had to mean for it to be worth anything. Dr. Anderson looked at the check for a moment longer. Then she looked at Lorraine. "I'll start the paperwork today," she said. "Maya can begin the new protocol next week." Lorraine nodded. She left the medical center and drove across Atlanta. The third stop required her to park on a street she'd had to look up that morning. Sit in the car, think about what she was going to say, which was the problem. She was skilled with words in rooms where words were instruments, where they opened doors or closed deals or redirected a board of directors. She was considerably less practiced with words in rooms where they didn't need to accomplish anything except be true, where the goal wasn't persuasion or precision or the careful management of how things landed, where the goal was just honesty, uncalculated, offered without knowing what would come back. She got out of the car, walked up to the building, rang the buzzer for 3C. Maya's voice came through the speaker immediately, like she'd been standing near the door. "Who is it?" "It's Lorraine." A pause. Then 1 second, the door buzzed open. Maya was waiting in the apartment doorway when Lorraine reached the 3rd floor, 8 years old. Socks that didn't match, one green, one printed with small yellow suns, holding a book flat against her chest with both arms. She looked at Lorraine with the direct, unhurried assessment of a child who had learned early to take the measure of people quickly and trust what she found. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Lorraine looked at her. "You look much better. I feel much better." She stepped back from the door without ceremony. "Dad's in the kitchen. He's making grilled cheese." The apartment smelled like butter and warm bread. Lorraine stepped inside. It was compact and considered. Books on 2 shelves organized by a system she couldn't immediately decode, not alphabetical, not by size. Something else, something that made sense to Maya. Artwork covering most of one wall, a running gallery, densely hung, the work of someone who had opinions about color and wasn't shy about using all of them. Bright reds and deep greens and yellows that meant something specific, arranged with the instinctive confidence of a person who knew what she liked and didn't need external validation to keep liking it. And the small table near the window with 2 chairs, and the chess set she recognized from a photograph Darnell had shown her weeks ago. Denise's set, the 2-toned pieces in their starting positions. She understood now what she hadn't understood when she first saw the photograph. The chess set wasn't decoration, it wasn't nostalgia kept visible, it was an ongoing conversation with someone who was no longer here to speak. The pieces reset every time, ready to begin again. That was the point. "You can sit," Maya said, already moving toward the table herself. Lorraine sat. Maya sat across from her and looked at her with complete ease. The comfort of a child who had already made her own assessment on her own terms and in her own time. She picked up the white queen and turned it over in her fingers, with the casual familiarity of someone handling something they've known their whole life. "Are you and my dad fighting?" she asked. Lorraine looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you look like someone who practiced what they were going to say on the drive over and then forgot it when I opened the door." Lorraine stared at her for a moment. 8 years old. "That's very perceptive," she said. "Dad says I have good pattern recognition." She set the queen back on her square. "He said it like it was about chess, but I think he meant everything. I think he did too, so are you? Fighting?" Lorraine looked at the board, at the pieces in their starting positions, waiting for someone to make the first move. "I said something that hurt him," she said, "and then I didn't fix it fast enough. And then some other things happened." She paused. "So yes, a little." Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to anything that mattered. She arranged 2 pawns with small, precise movements. "Dad doesn't stay mad," she said. "He gets quiet, which looks like mad, but it isn't the same thing. When he's quiet, it means he's still working something out and he hasn't decided yet. He's been pretty quiet this week," Lorraine said. "I know." Maya looked up. "I just wanted you to know he made extra grilled cheese. He always makes extra when he thinks someone might come over. He's been doing that for about 4 days." Lorraine absorbed that. The kitchen doorway was to her left. She heard the easy, practiced sound of someone making a meal they'd made many times. The particular domestic rhythm of it, unhurried and sure. The sound of a person who knew where everything was and had made peace with the specific dimensions of their life. Darnell came through the doorway with a plate. He saw her. He stopped, not surprised, not performing unsurprised either. Just looking at her the way he'd been looking at her since the conference room, with the careful steadiness of a man still in the middle of working something out. Still deciding. His expression was the expression of someone who had expected this arrival and was waiting to see what it carried. Maya said, "She let you in," he said. "She did. She came all the way here, Dad." Maya was already reaching for a triangle of grilled cheese. It would have been rude not to. He set the plate on the table, looked at Lorraine. She looked at him. Something shifted in the room, something that had been held carefully in place for weeks, loosened just at the edges, not resolving, not gone, but no longer quite so rigid. He sat down. "Your uncle had me transferred," he said. Not an accusation. Just a fact being placed on the table between them the way you'd place a chess piece. "Let's see where this goes. I know, I didn't tell you. I know why you didn't." She held his gaze. "And I need you to know I handled it this morning. It won't happen again." He understands that his position in that company does not extend to other people's livelihoods. She paused. "And I know you signed that transfer yourself. To keep me from having to deal with it. When most people would have called me immediately and made it my problem to solve," she said it quietly. "It wasn't yours to carry. Neither was the silence after it." He looked at the chess set between them. "I also know about the coaching position," she said. "The Atlanta Chess Association. Their offer." He looked up. "Angela, she thought I'd want to know." He was quiet. "She was right," Lorraine said. Maya had gone very still, holding her grilled cheese, listening the way children listen when they understand the adults are finally saying the real thing, not the version edited for young ears, but the actual thing underneath it. Lorraine leaned forward slightly, both hands flat on the table. "I'm going to ask you something," she said. "And I need the real answer. Not the responsible answer. Not the answer that protects everyone else from having to feel anything." She held his gaze. "What do you want, Darnell? For yourself? What does Darnell Cooper actually want?" The room was very quiet. He looked at Lorraine, at Maya, at the chessboard between them with its pieces waiting in their starting squares reset, ready, patient the way only inanimate things can be patient. And then he said it. Finally. The words coming out slowly, the way words come when they've been held in one place for a long time and the holding has made them careful. "I want to teach chess again." He stopped. Started again. Not because of what it was, because of what it is. Because there are kids in this city who think in patterns they don't have language for yet. And chess gives them the language, and I know how to show them that. He looked at the table. "I want Maya to be able to breathe through a whole night without either of us lying awake listening for what changes." He paused. The next words came even more slowly. "I want to stop eating dinner alone." The third thing landed differently than the first two, not louder, quieter. The weight of it came from how long it had clearly been true before he said it. Maya made a sound, not words. A sound that was doing the work of several words while technically remaining silent. A sound of someone who had been waiting a considerable amount of time for two people to say something obvious and was experiencing the relief of finally hearing it. Both adults looked at her. She was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone exercising restraint at significant personal cost. "Maya," Darnell said, "I'm not saying anything. You're very loudly not saying something. I have been patiently not saying something for 2 weeks, Dad." She looked at him, then at Lorraine, then back at him. Her voice was the voice of someone stating simple facts. "I'm going to go to my room and let you two figure it out." She picked up her grilled cheese, walked to her room with the unhurried dignity of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it, closed the door, deliberately. The kind of deliberate that is itself a statement. Darnell looked at the closed door for a moment, then at Lorraine. She was not quite smiling. He was not quite smiling. "She has excellent pattern recognition," Lorraine said. "She does," he agreed. The apartment was quiet now, just the two of them and the chess set and the November light coming through the window, lower and more direct than October, honest in a way summer light isn't, the kind of light that shows things as they actually are. "The board suspended me," she said. "I heard. Temporarily. There'll be a review. I'm not worried about the review. She paused. I'm worried about being someone who looks at you and reaches for the wrong thing when I'm scared. I'm worried about doing it again, about being in a moment that matters and asking the wrong question because the pressure is loud and you're the nearest person. She held his gaze. I don't want to be that person with you. He was quiet for a moment. You already know you're not, he said. You don't know that. I know you drove to a hospital at 2 a.m. without being called, he said it simply. Without waiting. Without making sure it would be received the way you intended it. I know you sat against that wall for 4 hours because you understood that was what was needed. Not a conversation, not an explanation. Just someone in the room? He paused. I know you handled my uncle before you came here. I know you talked to Dr. Anderson this morning. He looked at her steadily. And I know you're sitting in my kitchen right now instead of managing a corporate crisis. Which for you is not a small thing, she looked at him. Angela tells me everything, he said. I'm going to have a conversation with Angela. Don't. She's on your side. He looked at the chessboard between them, at the pieces that had been his wife's, then back at Lorraine. I'm on your side. The words were simple. They landed without ceremony. The way true things do when they've been true for a while, and are finally being said out loud for the first time. She reached across the table, placed her hand on the board, not on his hand. On the space between them, on the wood between the pieces, close enough. Call the chess association, she said. The coaching position. Call them, tell them the timeline has changed. Tell them Maya's health is being addressed and you're ready to have the conversation. She held his gaze. The calculus changed. Let it change. He looked at her hand on the board, at the pieces around it. At 7 years of careful equations settling into a different shape, what if they've filled the position? Then we find another, no hesitation. There are other boards, other programs, other rooms in this city that need someone who plays the way you play and thinks the way you think, and knows how to show someone else the pattern they can already almost see. She paused. And if you want a room, I will personally call every chess organization in Atlanta until someone with any sense gives you one. He almost smiled. That sounds like a misuse of executive authority. I'm currently suspended. I have time. He did smile then, the real one. The one that changed his whole face and showed the person underneath 7 years of careful steadiness, the person who had walked into a conference room at 9 p.m. and told a CEO exactly what was wrong with her position and then sat down and proved it in 21 moves. The one she'd first seen in the elevator going down from the 42nd floor. Just briefly, just enough to catch the shape of it before the doors opened. She had missed that smile more than she'd allowed herself to know until right now. Okay, he said. Okay? I'll call them, she nodded. They sat in the quiet kitchen with Denise's chess set between them. The November light moving slowly across the table. Outside the window, Atlanta was doing what it always did, moving and loud and indifferent to small moments. But in here, in this room, in the space between two people who had found each other in the most unlikely geography, a conference room at 9 p.m., over a board that belonged to a woman who was gone, something that had been held at careful distance, finally stopped being held. It didn't need a name yet. It was just present, settled, real in the way things are real when they've survived being tested and haven't broken. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, the Employee Health Initiative. He turned the words over slowly. The way he turned moves over. How long were you planning it? She looked at the board, at the pieces, then at him. Since the parking garage, she said. Since the night I watched you hold Maya's hand and talk to the dispatcher, and I understood for the first time that you'd been managing something alone that you shouldn't have had to manage alone. She paused. I needed it to be policy, not a gesture, not a check that could feel like an apology. Something permanent and structural that anyone in your situation could access. Not because I felt something about you specifically, though I did. I do, but because it was the right thing to build regardless of anything else. He was quiet for a moment. Maya's name is first on the list, he said. Yes, why? Because she should have been on a list like that a long time ago. He looked at her. She looked at him. And the thing that had been growing in the space between them for months through chess games and lobby coffee and hospital chairs and wrong questions and long silences and early mornings and the specific education of watching someone under pressure and seeing what they do with it, that thing settled into the room like it had always been there, and was only now being acknowledged. "Stay for dinner," he said. "Not a question." "Okay," she said. He stood and went back to the kitchen. She heard the stove click on, the refrigerator open. The sound of someone making room in a meal that was already planned, expanding it without drama, without ceremony, because that was how he did everything. Quietly, making space without making it a thing. She looked at the chessboard, reached out, moved a pawn. White's opening move. Not because anyone was watching, just because the board was there, and the position was open, and her hand moved before she thought about it, the way it had always moved on boards. The instinct her father had given her on Sunday mornings with rain on the windows. Maya appeared in the hallway, looked at the board, looked at Lorraine. "Are you moving pieces?" "Just one. You can't start a game without Dad." She sat down across from the board with the authority of a person whose house this was. "That's E4. That's an opening move." She studied the board with the focused attention she brought to everything. Then she looked up. "But if you want to practice while he's cooking," she said, "I'll play you." Lorraine looked at this 8-year-old, this girl with her father's eyes and her mother's certainty and her own particular stubbornness that belonged entirely to herself and no one else. "All right," she said. Maya moved her knight. Not E5, not the standard response. The knight swinging sideways to an unconventional square with no obvious strategic purpose, committed to a path that made no traditional sense. "That's," Lorraine started. "It's called the Gerald opening," Maya said, with complete seriousness. Lorraine blinked. "That's not a real opening. It is in this house." Maya looked up. The small gap on the left side of her smile, Darnell's smile, inherited exact, carrying forward something that belonged to both of them. Gerald moves diagonally, like a bishop, like a diving falcon. Those are the rules. From the kitchen, the sound of a spatula on a pan, the smell of butter deepening into something warm and specific and domestic, the ordinary music of a family making room for one more person at the table. Lorraine looked at the board, looked at Maya, looked at the knight on its unconventional square, committed entirely to its own logic. She moved her bishop. Not the textbook response. Something else. Something that kept the game open longer than it needed to be, that prioritized continuation over efficiency, that chose the longer road because the longer road was the point. Maya studied it, looked up with an expression that suggested she approved of the decision-making process, if not necessarily the move itself. "Good," she said. "Now we can actually play." The house sat on a street with an oak tree in the front yard, old enough to have opinions about the neighborhood. Its roots had long since made their own arrangements with the sidewalk, and the city had stopped fighting about it, had simply repaired around it twice, 3 times, accepting the oak as a permanent condition. Lorraine liked that about the tree. It had outlasted several arguments. The backyard had enough room for a garden. She was learning to grow things. This had turned out to require considerably more patience and considerably less strategy than she'd initially applied. Her first instinct had been to research optimal soil conditions and planting schedules and yield ratios, and approach the whole enterprise with the same systematic preparation she brought to quarterly earnings calls. Darnell had watched her do this for 3 days and then said, mildly, that some things just needed to be put in the ground and checked on. She'd argued with him about it. She'd been wrong. The tomatoes were thriving. There was also a stone patio with a table where the chessboard now lived. Permanent resident of the outdoors, moved inside only when the weather made staying outside genuinely unreasonable, which in Atlanta meant a narrow window between too cold and too hot, with brief, perfect intervals in between. Maya had designated the patio board as community property and had developed what she called the backyard rules, flexible in their specifics, frequently revised without notice and entirely non-negotiable in their application once established. The Gerald opening was canonical. This was not up for discussion. It was a Sunday in February, cold, but not cold enough to stay inside, which Maya had determined, and announced over breakfast with the finality of someone who had considered the matter thoroughly and arrived at a conclusion that would not benefit from further input. Darnell had looked at Lorraine. Lorraine had looked at Darnell. They had both put on extra layers and come outside. Darnell and Lorraine sat across from each other at the patio table. Maya was in the chair off to the side, with a book rotating between 4 books currently. A system she maintained was not chaotic, but was in fact a highly optimized approach to information processing, that adults simply lacked the cognitive flexibility to appreciate. The chessboard held a game that had been going for just over an hour. The Atlanta Chess Association had called back in November. The coaching position was still open. Darnell had negotiated his own terms. Lorraine had known he would, had kept entirely out of it except to say call them and mean it. Flexible hours built around Maya's school schedule. Room to develop his own curriculum rather than inherit someone else's. A modest salary that covered what it needed to cover with a little left over, which was more margin than he'd had in 7 years, and felt, in its smallness, like something large. He came home on his first day in January, with the expression of someone who had set something down a very long time ago, and had just picked it back up and found that it still fit the shape of his hands. The weight of it familiar, the feel of it unchanged. He'd sat at the kitchen table that evening with Denise's chess set between him and Maya, and shown her an opening he'd been developing for a student who thought in lateral jumps, who saw the board in diagonals, who reminded him of someone he loved very much. Maya had studied it for 4 minutes in complete silence. Then she'd said it was good, but the endgame needed work. He'd agreed with her. They'd worked on it together until 10 p.m. Lorraine had made dinner. He hadn't asked her to. She'd just made dinner. The board review at Whitmore Group had concluded in December. 3 of the 4 members who'd voted against her had come back Patterson first, which surprised no one who knew him, and 2 others whose return was quieter and more considered, and meant more because of it. The 4th resigned. Something about strategic disagreement, a phrase that covered a range of things nobody needed to name out loud. Victor remained chairman. Their relationship was changing the way family relationships change when something true has finally been said between people who love each other and have been carefully avoiding that truth for years. Slowly, not without friction. Still in motion. Getting somewhere, the Employee Family Health Initiative became permanent policy in November. 47 contracted employees enrolled in the first quarter. The number was still growing. Word traveled through building services networks in ways that formal HR communications never quite managed. Person to person, floor to floor, the information moving the way important information always moved among people who had learned not to rely on official channels. Maya's lungs on the new treatment protocol were doing better. Not perfect, there were still difficult nights, still the monitor on her dresser, still the specific vigilance of a father who had trained himself over 7 years to hear things in his daughter's breathing that other people would sleep through. But the episodes were less frequent, less severe. The space between hard nights was getting longer. She'd made it through 6 weeks without a serious episode. Then 8. The math was changing. She was breathing, which had always been the whole thing. Which would always be the whole thing. Your turn, Darnell said. Lorraine looked at the board. She'd been building toward a combination for 20 minutes. A knight fork that would pressure his queen side and open space on the other flank. She'd been counting the moves required. 4 moves to set it up, then the fork, then a rook activation that would give her a decisive material advantage. She had it clean, efficient. The kind of position that felt good to build toward, that rewarded the patience of the past 20 minutes. She looked at his face. He was watching the board with the relaxed attention of someone who was fully present and not in any hurry to be anywhere else. The February light on his face lower and more direct than October light. Honest in the way winter light is honest. It showed things without flattering them. She had always found that quality in him before she had a word for it. He was someone who showed things without flattering them. She had come very close to losing this. Not the company, not the position, not the review or the board vote, or the 6 weeks of navigating the aftermath of a 90-second clip. Those had been hard, and she had handled them the way she handled hard things directly, without flinching, with the specific confidence of someone who had built something real and knew what it was worth. This. She had almost lost this. The man across the table. The girl in the chair who was currently rotating between a book about migratory birds, a history of the Byzantine Empire, a novel set in contemporary Atlanta that she had opinions about, and a mathematics workbook. She was completing 3 grade levels ahead of schedule because she found the regular pace aesthetically unsatisfying. The house with the oak tree and the garden she was learning. The Sunday mornings that had become their particular shape of Sunday slow coffee and the newspaper and chess and whatever Maya had decided was the agenda, which was always something. She had come this close to losing it before she'd even understood what it was. She moved the knight, not the square that set up the combination. A different square. One that started a longer sequence, less decisive, less efficient, keeping both sides active and the game open and continuing, extending the middle game rather than accelerating toward the end. Darnell looked at the move. Then at her. That's not what you've been building. I changed my mind. Why? She looked at the board. Then at him. Because the combination ends the game in 8 moves, she said. And I don't want this game to end in 8 moves. He held her gaze and understood. The way he understood things, not quickly, not performatively, but completely, the kind of understanding that has roots. Maya, he said, without looking away from Lorraine. Maya said from her chair, not looking up from the migratory birds. What did you say last week? About why people play? A pause. The sound of a page turning, which meant she was switching books, which meant she had reached a natural pause point in the birds, and was moving to the Byzantine Empire or possibly the math. The point isn't to win, Maya said, with the distracted authority of someone stating something obvious while thinking about something else. The point is to keep playing as possible with long as playing with, let someone worth playing with. Darnell looked at Lorraine. She looked at him, the board between them. The afternoon light coming through the oak tree's bare February branches in that particular pattern, bare branches. Make not a blocking the light, but breaking it into something more interesting than it would have been unobstructed. The garden on the other side of the patio, where things were still underground, still in the process of becoming, trusting that the conditions were right, even though there was nothing yet to show for it. The girl in the chair, moving through her 4 books with characteristic efficiency, not bothering to look up because she had already assessed the situation and reached her conclusions and filed them away, and moved on to the Byzantine Empire, all of it, all at once, present and ordinary, and when she let herself look at it directly, when she stopped managing her own response to it and just let it be what it was, everything. Your move, she said. He reached forward. His hand moved to his bishop, the piece Maya had been trying to rename for 3 years. The Traveler, the Gerald, the piece that moves diagonally across the whole board and covers more ground than anything else on it. He picked it up, set it down on a new square, opening a line, keeping the game alive, choosing the longer path over the faster one. The game went on. Outside, the oak tree held its ground the way it had been holding its ground for longer than anyone on the street could remember. The garden waited in its patient underground way. Atlanta moved around them, indifferent and enormous and entirely unconcerned with what was happening on this particular patio, on this particular Sunday. 2 people finding the longer path, a child reading 4 books at once, a board game that had started in a conference room at 9 p.m. in October and had no particular reason to end. The February light shifted slightly as the afternoon moved. The shadows changed their angles. The cold was the kind of cold that sits on your shoulders without being unbearable, the kind you stop noticing after a while because you're occupied with something more interesting. Maya turned another page. Lorraine looked at the board. She reached forward and moved her rook, not closing anything, opening something. The game expanded outward from the center, both sides active, both sides with pieces in motion, the position complex and alive in the way. Only positions that haven't been decided yet are alive. Darnell studied it. She watched him think the particular quality of stillness that came over him when he was reading a position, when he was finding the patterns that other people walked past. The quality his daughter had inherited and his wife had loved, and that she had recognized that first night, before she knew anything about him at all, just from watching him stand in a doorway and look at a board. Good, he said. Not to flatter her, because it was true. Now we can actually play, she said. He looked up at her and smiled, and the game went on.